Hello and welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. And today, of course, we're talking about the Monaco Grand Prix, which finished quite a few hours ago today, but still Sunday for us here in Mexico. And let's just say, the way I look at it, Chris, is this Grand Prix was great in terms of the results. I think it's made the championship a lot more exciting. I think it was the result that the championship itself needed, but the race was not particularly exciting, and it kicked off in the worst possible way, really, with Charles Leclerc getting that pole in Monaco. We know how passionate I would say he is about his home Grand Prix, and he didn't even get to start because his gearbox or drive shaft, whatever it was, just disintegrated when they put some load into it after his accident yesterday. And that was a really, really big disappointment to kick off the weekend, or to kick off the race, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a mistake from Ferrari not to check. I think it might have been more prudent just to take the hit and change the gearbox because we'd seen it happen before at Monaco in 2018 when Verstappen did a similar thing in a similar place, ended up with a similar problem. You sort of feel, would it have been better to play it safe, start Leclerc fifth and pick up those points, or try for glory and put him out in an untested and still possibly broken gearbox? Obviously, you know which one they did, and it is very easy to sit on a podcast and say, well, obviously they should have changed it. But still, tragically, it left us without a pole sitter for the start of the race, especially when the pole sitter was a man at his home Grand Prix.
Yeah, which I just think of all the times that you need to actually really think very carefully about taking a hit. I just feel like this was the one. I know that Charles Leclerc was so desperate to get that first position or to win the race, because being on pole in Monaco is vital to getting the win. But Ferrari need the points, especially if they want to keep up with McLaren. And when you've got Lando Norris banging out podiums throughout this season, you're going to need those points. And then you not only do you miss out on the points, but you go and break your lead driver's heart by not being able to actually take part in the race. You're right. With hindsight, it's so easy to say. But when you've got something that a piece of equipment or whatever on the car that you can change, and you know that car's going to finish the race, more or less certain, compared with the gearbox where you don't even know what's going to happen with it until you put it in the car and you take it on a reconnaissance lap. I think it's one of those things that I think at the moment separates Ferrari, being the position that they're in, compared with a top team like Mercedes. It's decisions like that where they have to make them. They tend to make, or they have tended over the last couple of years, just to make the wrong call.
Yes. And it makes me want to talk about questionable pit stop decisions, which sort of leads me towards discussing the strangeness going on in the Mercedes pit stop. But I think before we deal with that, we should probably point out the other Ferrari had Ferrari's best race in some time. Carlos Sainz getting second place again, following up on the Italian Grand Prix last year. Really good drive. Obviously, he automatically moved up a place because his teammate was out, but he still managed to get in there, and he still managed to hold on to second place. And at one point, it looked like he was going to get Verstappen. I know that didn't materialize in the same way, but fantastic drive from Carlos that we should definitely talk about all the same.
He did really well. And actually, I think he did kind of get second place by default. That sounds a lot worse and that sounds like I'm taking credit away from him, which I'm not. But Bottas retired in front of him. Leclerc didn't start the race in front of him, so he was kind of bumped up to that second place. But Bottas wasn't exactly pulling away, and I think there was scope for a potential pit stop strategy for Ferrari to get Sainz ahead of him in some way. And like you said, there was, he was keeping up with the rest of the pack. He was with the front runners. He deserved that second place, and he drove it very well. And I think that it's a really good result for Ferrari. They really needed that, considering the fact that Leclerc didn't start. That was vital for them to get those points. So all in all, actually, what you could say is it was a good weekend for Ferrari, because they they had the pace, the car was there. Both drivers looked like, if there hadn't been a red flag in the qualifying, actually, who knows where they would have qualified. They could have got, front row in some way, other than Leclerc. So I think that it's overall still a good weekend for them. And if they can kick on from here, if they can show that it wasn't just a fluke, that the car works well in Monaco but nowhere else, then hopefully they can start to work their way up the constructors table.
Yeah, they're looking like, if this progress continues, we're going to see Ferrari versus McLaren for third place, which is an exciting prospect. Speaking of Ferrari versus McLaren, well done to Lando Norris, third place driver, second podium of the season, puts him in third in the Drivers' Championship, 9 points ahead of Valtteri Bottas. Really, really good day for McLaren in what has suddenly become one of the best looking cars of all time.
I do want to touch on that livery because it's stunning. I think it's one of the most gorgeous paint jobs I've ever seen. I just think it looks so good, and I think they need to keep it for forever. I think it just looks beautiful, and I don't know, maybe it gave Lando Norris a bit of extra oomph, but not so much for Daniel Ricciardo. It was certainly, as you say, a tale of two drivers.
Yeah, very much. Very. I mean, Ricciardo likes to regard himself as a Monaco specialist, and he looked like he was struggling in a new car. But I was talking to my wife about it this morning, and what I said was, like, you do have to take into account the new cars. And she said, yes, but look at Sainz and look at Perez. They're both in new cars, and they're doing quite well. And that's certainly Sainz today, coming second in a car he's unfamiliar with. Perez coming fourth and challenging for third in a car he's unfamiliar with. What is it about those two cars that we're not seeing coming out of that McLaren?
It's weird because actually it felt like he turned a corner in Spain, where he finished ahead of Norris for the first time, and he actually had a very good weekend. It really felt like he'd kicked on, and now he was just bumped straight back again. So I'm not really sure what's going on with him. I think that there are some drivers maybe take a little bit longer to settle in than others, but with Ricciardo, he's moved around enough now, you would say, to know how to deal, and he's experienced enough to be able to deal with a changing car. Like, the Formula One cars are still Formula One cars. They're not like insanely different, so much so that you get in one car you don't know what you're doing, and the other one it just suits you perfectly. So yeah, it just didn't get hooked up for him this weekend, did it? But maybe there was a whole combination of things. When you have a bad qualifying Monaco, you pay for it in the race. So maybe I'm making excuses for him. I don't know.
Well, I think it's his fifth team. He was HRT, Toro Rosso, Red Bull, Renault, and now McLaren. So, as you say, he has had enough time to be able to understand that when you move, there is a learning period. But yeah, he's not the only high-profile driver that didn't have a good weekend. I think the only time we're going to talk about Lewis Hamilton today is to say that Lewis Hamilton also had a poor weekend. Not unsalvageably poor, and he's only 4 points behind. A winning backer will see him retake the lead. In fact, finishing on the podium ahead of Verstappen in any position will see him retake the lead. So, yeah, Lewis Hamilton mentioned for this race completely over, I think. Let's move on instead to our race winner, Verstappen, who I thought is just continuing his trend of being increasingly mature and confident driver. The move down to turn one, where he just kept Sainz out from taking the inside line, which allowed him to then fly off and control the race, was brilliant. It was the only thing he had to do all race, and he did it perfectly.
Yeah, we talk about it with Lewis all the time, where you have to have that level of concentration and strength to lead a Grand Prix for its entirety, and then you have to times that by 10 for Monaco, because Mark Webber was saying actually before the race that he was talking to Jenson Button before, and both times they were sort of thinking before they were about to win the Grand Prix that for the last 10-20 laps you just start to feel the barriers close in on you. It feels like they're getting closer and closer closer. And it really does take a full level of concentration. And I still think, I know Max Verstappen has been in the sport for a long time. He's not actually really considered a young driver such compared to the rest of the field, but he still, in the past, future world champions who aren't world champions yet have made mistakes at those races. They've lost their concentration at those key points, and he kept it going. I think it was yet another brilliant drive, and it was more proof that Verstappen is the only person who can hold a candle to Lewis Hamilton.
Yes, yeah, I don't think there's any discussion looking at the grid this year. The only person that's coming remotely close is Verstappen. And until Hamilton came seventh today, they'd both come either first or second every single race so far this season. He's been brilliant. And I'd like to say more about how good he's been. I did think that despite his initial outburst on the team radio when he was asked about the incident that happened in qualifying, he was very mature and calm, just said, yeah, definitely an accident. These things happen. Despite the fact that he was clearly very upset at losing the opposite.
And understandably as well. Like,
yep.
that's perfectly fine. I think I think in the moment there are many Formula One world champions and drivers who in the past we haven't had the privilege of listening to their radio, and they would have been like that. They would have been furious about losing that pole position, only to then, once they get out of the car and they've calmed down, they've spoken to their engineer, they've spoken to people, and then they've gone, it happens, you move on and you deal with it.
Yeah. I don't have much else to say about Verstappen. Maybe I thought he did well.
Yeah.
So
we
go for it.
Which I think it's important for us as well to mention Valtteri Bottas, who was having a decent race in second until a bizarre pit stop incident or wheel nut issue led to his retirement. They just couldn't get the right front off.
Yeah, it was a strange way to go out. I spent a lot of the Grand Prix wondering how they were going to get it off in the end. But I don't suppose that really matters to Valtteri Bottas. What matters is he was on to cement his feeling that he is deserving of a place at Mercedes. And it was taken from him by a really bizarre incident. It's his second DNF of the season. And the season's only 5 races in. So he has been he's the only driver to fail to finish on more than one occasion. And you can't really say that either incident was his fault. I don't think that he can really be blamed for the collision at Imola. And I don't think that there's anything anyone really could have done about the wheel nut incident. So it's a disappointing weekend for him again in what is going to be a disappointing year. He slips to 4th behind Norris in the standings, which may well be rectified later on in the season. But he just third retirement is not the season of a man who's trying to show that he really can keep up with the best in the world.
Didn't expect him to challenge necessarily for a title this year, or we certainly didn't think he was going to be world champion when you've got the likes of Lewis Hamilton. But is it too early to say that his title challenge is gone? Or because I don't think it's too early. I think we can say it now that
less than half the points of Hamilton and Verstappen. I don't see where he's going to pull out an extra 55, but needs more than that. In fact, he needs an extra 58 points to get ahead of Verstappen. That's, 2 wins and another point scoring finish with Verstappen failing to score points. And F1 cars are so reliable now. It's not like 25 years ago when you'd assume that Verstappen's engine was probably going to go at some point. I think, unfortunately, he's blown his chances already. But there's no benefit, I think, to continuing to speculate about where he'll be next year. We'll hear in the fullness of time. But yeah, I would be disappointed with today if I was Valtteri Bottas, even more so because there was nothing that could have been done about what happened.
Yeah, it was just incredibly unlucky, and it's it's just one of those things where it seems to all not be going his way so far this season. But it also seemed that way for Aston Martin as well until today. Vettel had a very good race. I was very impressed. The strategy got him somehow ahead of both Hamilton and Gasly, so he jumped up 2 places and ended up finishing 5th, which is his best result for quite some time. And also Stroll in 8th meant that in total Aston Martin have collected 14 points from that race. Are these now the green shoots of recovery for Aston Martin, or is it another kind of red herring?
Well, for one, they're British racing green shoots. And for two, we'll need to see coming up if they can keep this up. Monaco is a special case, but if they can show that they have made the improvements they need to stay ahead of AlphaTauri, then it's promising. Stroll is really showing what a decent driver he is this year. You know, he's assuming the mantle of team leader when he was expected to be in a learning phase. And hopefully, hearing Happy Vettel after the race today, we're going to see him get his mojo back enough to progress up the table. But they're currently sat on 10 points for Vettel, 9 points for Stroll, 11th and 12th respectively. It's looking definitely better. It was a good weekend all round, and I think they can go away feeling like progress is being made. It's just before we can call it, we really need to see sustained progress, I think. Otherwise, we've said this, I think, this year about Yuki Tsunoda. We said about Alpine last time out. Oh, this is it. This is where they get better. And then the following race, they just failed to deliver. So ask me again after France. But yeah, it looks like it.
And I will come on to our little kind of honourable mentions later in a second. I just want to talk a little bit about the championship and the position that we're in right now with it, because I think that, like I said at the beginning, even though that race was not particularly exciting, it has really kind of tightened up the field a bit, or certainly the top 2 anyway. So as you mentioned, Verstappen is now leading the Drivers' World Championship, but only by 4 points to Lewis Hamilton. Like you said, all Lewis has to do is finish really in front of Verstappen to get ahead of him. And obviously Lewis got that extra point as well for fastest lap today, which did just kind of boost him up a bit. But also you've got Norris now 9 points ahead of Bottas in 4th, which is a really nice buffer to have. And if Norris can keep that going, maybe actually he could really challenge for that top 3. Then you've got Bottas on 47 points in 4th. You've got Perez in 5th on 44. You've got Leclerc in 6th on 40, who obviously didn't get any points this weekend. You've got Sainz in 7th on 38. It's really quite tight in that kind of upper midfield, which is great. I think that's really what we need from the championship. And then in the Constructors' Championship, you've then got Red Bull leading the pack by just a single point. So things are really looking a lot tastier after this weekend.
Yeah, it was a nice shake-up that sort of put some life into what was threatening to be a very one-sided championship battle. But it's going to be, I think, the critical battle of the second drivers. Is Perez, who does seem to be improving, 5th, 11th, 4th, 5th, 4th. He's nearly where he needs to be. And Bottas, who either comes 3rd or fails to finish. Which one of them is going to click into gear first? Is Perez going to respond positively to the pressure? Is Bottas going to fall away as speculation increases about his future? Whichever one of those 2 drivers can bring it is going to help cement the constructors for their team. I expect Norris to fall away to probably 4th. He'll be overtaken by whichever second driver from Red Bull and Mercedes gets it together first. But the constructors does suddenly feel a lot closer than it did 2 weeks ago.
There are some mini leagues in there. So you've got the top 2, as we mentioned. But you've then got McLaren in 3rd, Ferrari in 4th, separated by just 2 points. So there is a battle for 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, without a doubt. Then you've got this huge gap down to 5th, 6th, and 7th. So you've got Aston Martin 5th, AlphaTauri 6th, Alpine in 7th, separated by just 2 points, the 3 teams. And then you've got the battle of the teams at the bottom who are just trying to get a point. So there are these little mini leagues going on, which does make it really exciting in the constructors overall, I think.
Yeah, it does. There's definitely going to be some drama for that 5th place. Will Aston Martin go on a roll and begin to pick up points and pull away into a league of their own? Was it just a slow start that's going to cost them overall position? Or is it a sign that Aston Martin are going to be on the same level as Alpine and AlphaTauri? Let's find out there who's going to be best of the rest at McLaren and Ferrari. Not quite the McLaren versus Ferrari battle I think Formula One fans are traditionally used to seeing, but no less engaging. No. And then the true rivalry of the turbo hybrid era, Red Bull versus Mercedes at the top.
So other small but important points that we want to make about the race then. Fernando Alonso, why did he come back? It's just time to give it up, isn't it?
Yeah. When we put the notes together for this episode, I wrote "Go home, old man Alonso." I like Alonso. I think he is one of the greats, but I think he's Schumachering his return. 10th, 8th, 17th, 13th in the last 4 races is dreadful. Really, that's embarrassing for a driver of his stature. The only driver of any meaningful experience below him is Kimi, and Kimi is driving an Alfa Romeo for fun. So, yeah, what
he's
is there
driving
to
it
say?
well.
He is driving it well. You feel if they were an equal machinery, Kimi might have the edge. What is Alonso doing? Like, why is Alonso doing? Go home, old man. Like you've had your time. It pains me to say it because
it is time.
Alonso was brilliant, but there's no big improvement curve over this year unless Alpine can pull out something amazing. And if Alpine pull out something amazing, Ocon's had 4 point scoring finishes in the last 5, so he'll be the one that makes the most of it.
Exactly, and I think that's the important thing to say is that Ocon is outperforming him, I think, at the moment. And you can make these comparisons with Alonso and Raikkonen, but I think that Alonso is not really driving the wheels off that Alpine, and Raikkonen probably is. And also, I do think there is that situation where when Raikkonen says, this is just a hobby for me. I'm just doing it because I want to. That puts you in a mindset. He's kind of clarified what he's doing in the sport. Alonso hasn't. Alonso hasn't said, "Oh, I'm just here for a bit of fun." He hasn't said that, I'm doing this to win a world championship either. But he always kind of makes out like he's in it to compete and he's in it to be, as good as he can be, which is fine. But the problem is that you kind of have to live up to those expectations, I think.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. He's put a target on himself. Yeah. And now as he underperforms, again, I think the third of that trifecta of experienced drivers with young teammates, Ricciardo, Alonso and Raikkonen, who are all, and Vettel in 4th, I suppose, who were all struggling this year against drivers you would have expected them to mentor and lead. Yeah. It just makes you ask what he's doing, doesn't it? Why are you not doing better? But there's nothing else to say. He's had very unremarkable races all the way through. On the other hand, do you know who didn't come last today?
I think Nikita Mazepin has gone, as I said to you, he's gone from being dangerously slow to just slow and maybe a little bit faster than slow now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly enough to finish it. Schumacher struggled with Monaco. He put it in the barriers in free practice. He put it in the barriers before qualifying. It's clearly not the track for him at this stage of his career. But the Haas, 3 laps down, both of them really quite embarrassing. But yeah, credit where credit's due. Nikita Mazepin did not come last on merit for once. Well done. I watch your career with great interest. Finally, of course, speaking of young and inexperienced drivers, after what was an absolutely blazing start to the season, Yuki Tsunoda is just not having any luck. He's struggled his way through the weekend. He's finished behind both Williams again. And he's just looking like maybe he is going to need this year to really get to grips. Maybe he isn't going to take that fight to Pierre Gasly just yet.
I really hope that AlphaTauri give him time. I hope they let him use this season to make his mistakes, to have these terrible race weekends, learn how to bounce back from them, and they don't just say you weren't good enough in 1 year at AlphaTauri. Just let him make these mistakes as long as he's not, dangerous, causing too many issues. But I think also what maybe makes it look a lot worse is that Gasly is doing very well. Gasly, I think, is too good for AlphaTauri. He's a better driver than what that car gives him. He could be in a team that's higher up. So you've got, I guess it's kind of like you've got that Verstappen and whatever teammate, whatever second driver Red Bull have. It's actually now a little bit similar for AlphaTauri, where Gasly is too good for the car, and any other driver who comes in is going to be young, is going to be inexperienced, and is going to have, there's going to be that chasm between them.
Yeah, the poor Gasly is sort of stuck because there's no seats further up. He's been linked with his C at Alpine next year, but I don't see if he can stay at AlphaTauri why he'd want to go to Alpine just yet. But yeah, he's looking like a real. He's sat in ninth at the moment, and yeah, there is a bit of a gap between him and Ricardo. But Ricardo's car, as we're seeing, is capable of sitting in third in the championship in the right hands. So to be, there or thereabouts is still a real achievement. Experienced or comparatively experienced driver or not, I think Gasly has started really well. And yeah, if he goes on like this, you might even feel he's in contention for a cheeky podium in a wet race.
Who knows? And I think that there is one final point that I think we should discuss, which is not necessarily about the race itself, but is about Monaco in general. And I think it's an important point, because in the past I've sort of dismissed people who have said Monaco's too boring, Monaco's this, that, and the other, and I dismissed it because I think that it's a really important thing that the drivers have a complete variation of tracks throughout the season. And Monaco is a completely different challenge to any other circuit. I know we have a lot more street circuits these days than in the past, but it doesn't matter. Monaco is still the pinnacle of a street circuit from a driver's perspective. It is the most challenging. And I think it's really important that the drivers have that on the calendar. But the races for the spectators, certainly those watching on television, the race is dull. There's no overtaking that can really happen. There's not really anything that goes on in the race. What needs to change? Does something need to change?
I feel that F1 in Monaco is in Monaco for F1. It's there for the physical pomp and circumstance and the high-end tickets. It is always a dull affair on track. The cars are too big for the track now. It made sense in the 50s and 60s when the cars were tiny and you could get them too wide through the streets, 3 wide, I imagine, in places. But you're not on a car now that's over, like 2.5 meters long. It's just far too big to be fighting with. There's no room round. You saw a couple of times today, Perez and Norris, for example, at the end. Norris held on poor tyres for 20-something laps. And there was nothing Perez could do to get around him, despite the fact that on a normal circuit he would have done, because the track's just too narrow. I do understand the argument for Monaco. Could you widen the circuit slightly? Could you add a new section just after Ras-Cas? Like, what can we do to make Monaco more interesting? Because you're right, it is just such a dull procession. Like, it was really, as soon as we found out Leclerc couldn't start today, you knew Verstappen had won, barring some sort of mechanical failure, because you knew no one was going to get round him. The only real overtakes of any meaning were really well pulled off pit stop strategies. It's just, it shouldn't be controversial to say Monaco is boring, but Monaco is boring if you're not there. So do you treat it as some sort of legacy exhibition where the rich and the famous go spend fabulous sums of money, or do you treat it as a Formula One race? In which case, why are you entertaining non-existent racing and a terrible independent television director? It has to be said.
Yeah. I think what worried me the most today in the race is when the cars were driving around after the first few laps, when things had spread out a little bit, there was just this consistent gap between every car. It was this 2-second gap where they were in the dirty air of the car in front. They couldn't close up right behind to get anywhere near close enough for an actual overtake, and there was just this spacing that was so, boring and set. And it's not even like back in, I think it was 92, for the last couple of laps of the Monaco Grand Prix, when Senna was holding off Mansell, and Mansell was all over the back of him. He was right up close, like almost touching the gearbox at the back, right? And you don't get that level of closeness anymore either with the cars. So I like to think that the change in regulations for next year, where the cars should be able to follow each other a lot more closely, will have an impact on the Grand Prix, because they're watching cars attempting to overtake at Monaco, I still think is exciting. I still think that seeing cars weave about behind, trying to find the smallest of gaps, is exciting. And I think that if we have that closed gap between the cars, we might get that again. And therefore, maybe the circuit doesn't need changing that much. But if we have a similar race next season to what we had this season, then I do think that some serious consideration there needs to be some consideration to changing the layout, or, like you said, potentially widening the track or something to change it.
Do you think there's an argument to be made it should return to its original layout, which was straighter? The Nouvelle chicane was just a sort of little kink, and the run from Tabac down today to what is Rascasse was more or less straight. Is putting the infrastructure in to return it to that sort of layout something that would work? Because it would definitely create a slow first sector, and then a very fast final sector, which might provide overtaking opportunities. I don't know. It's difficult as well, because Monaco, more than any other track, is beholden to like the fact they're building a very expensive city around it. So where you can reprofile corners in Spain, where you can create new straights at Silverstone, you can't really do that at Monaco. So where does it leave you? As you said, hopefully next year the regulation change will mean that cars can get right behind each other. But even when they do get right behind each other, it's not as simple as magically zapping into the lead because you touched someone's gearbox. You've still got to find the room to get around them, and the cars are, as it stands, just too big to do that.
Well, we will find out next season what happens. But in terms of the next race, or our next podcast, next one up is Azerbaijan, which is the beginning of June. So in a few weeks' time. So we will see you for that. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much. We did have our first comment on our YouTube video on our podcast for the last podcast that we did for the Spanish Grand Prix. Thank you so much to that for that, and we will of course engage you more in the discussion in future podcasts as well, and really get you involved in what we're talking about. So thank you so much for listening. Have a really nice rest of your week, everybody, and we'll see you for the next Grand Prix in Azerbaijan.